the challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of faith. Nearly 60 years later, during these challenging times, we'll take a new look at our divisions, our connections, in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. So begins the inscription on the Statue of Liberty. But it is difficult to reconcile that promise with the reality in this country this year. In this edition of Challenge 2.0, Terms of Compassion, Faces Behind the Fear, we seek to find those faces, to examine the roots of compassion fatigue, and alternative responses to those who are yearning to breathe free. I guarantee you will not finish watching this program with the same perspectives that you begin watching the program, and that is thanks to four wonderful guests that have joined us today. I'd like to introduce them briefly, and you'll hear much more about them. Jorge Barón, the Executive Director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Thank you so much, Jorge. Beth Farmer, the Director of Refugees Northwest, a program of Lutheran Community Services Northwest. Thanks for joining us. And Dr. Stephen Miller, a volunteer medical missionary who has taken surgical mission teams to many countries under both Healing the Children and Rotary International. And many of those missions have been in Central America. Thank you, Steve. And finally, Ross Egge, the Northwest Regional Director of NPH USA, an organization which is raising thousands of children, really, that would otherwise be left homeless, I believe it's fair to say, in countries ranging from Mexico on the north to Peru and Bolivia to the south. So thank you for joining us. As we look at this, I was reminded, as I was researching this program, of a quote from the writer, social activist, and monk Thomas Merton, who once criticized our country as being filled with tourists in life, as he liked to call them, people who lack nothing but brothers and sisters, who cannot realize that the stranger has something to offer them, something very valuable. Is that a fair assessment today? And does this speak to the larger issue of our response to those seeking help, in some cases, to come into our country? What is your take on that? Jorge.
All right. Well, I do think that we're at a difficult moment in our history right now as a country. I think we are, in this sense of we have this idea of the United States as being a country that was based on immigration, and yet at the same time, where we have this, fear of immigration, and so there's this duality and this tension that we talk about it sometimes as an ideal, and we look back fondly at migration from Europe in the 18th, 19th century, but now we're in this sense of like that this is like a bad thing. And so I'm concerned about the way we're looking at it and the fact that we're reacting to people as a threat rather than seeing their common humanity.
Beth, how about your perspective?
Yeah, I would say that I think it has been something over history that the current generation fears the current immigrant and assumes that the previous immigrant that's now adjusted and integrated was somehow different than the people that are coming today. So that fear just keeps rolling through different generations. In my work with refugees and asylum seekers, one of the things that I'm always really struck by is how much people have to offer to the communities that they live in. Not only do I have the great privilege to get to work with journalists and teachers and doctors and lawyers, but all the people who are excited to contribute to their new communities. And so I often think that fear is based on the fact that people don't know the other, have not worked in these communities. And I always tell people, if you're afraid or you think there's a problem, I really encourage you to go and work with these communities because I'm 100% confident it'll dispel that fear.
Steve, you come back having done the medical missions and you're talking with people and explaining what you've done. Do you notice sort of a two-channel response on that as well?
Well, absolutely. The focus of my work is to take very highly specialized medical people for basically a 1-week intense surgical program to operate on children in particular and a few adults in these countries where if we weren't there, they would not have access to this care. They would not get it, and they would not get the opportunities that go with it. But what's most important to me, or sort of a side view, it's very important to my reasoning for going there, is these people that I take, and most are medical, some are civilian, the non-medical trained people, and they work as a team, but they come back changed people. These very ideas that people have, misideas about immigration, about what these people are like, they're looking at these people in the face, and they know what they're up against, and they know what they're doing. So I think that bringing back people and changing their lives, it was actually an unexpected side effect that I didn't notice until later on. And now that is a prime motivator for me to do that.
Ross, I might ask you your response on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that really it is empathy and understanding that does allow us to meet those who are coming to our country, or go and visit them and spend time with them in their country and meet them where they're at and see them as individuals and human beings just like us. And that happens very naturally when you're spending time with them. Our organization, as we work with children and families over long term, we make a long-term investment, so we're with them over the trajectory of many, many years, and supporting them and accompanying them through to full independence. And as you do that, they become so much more than just, they become family in a very real way. And just like all of our extended families, there's complications, there's very diverse circumstances in which they're coming from and challenges that they're dealing with. But on an individual level, being able to get to know them and spend time with them and walk with them allows you to really understand and see the value that they do bring to any community in which they're living. They're truly incredible people of every country, of every stripe, and the work of NPH has allowed me to see that in a very real way, a very personal way, and yeah, I think the more opportunities that we have through medical missions or any other organization or program that allows us to interact and understand the other as it's seen before is helpful.
It seems to me that there are two parts to this issue that we're talking about, many more parts than that, but that we could focus on two today. And one is the basic conditions that people are either dealing with that cause some of them to desire to leave their home country, and then what they're encountering when they attempt to enter or they do enter the United States. So let's begin with the first part. And Steve, I might ask you to give us a brief summary, and you did a little bit, but of the medical mission work that you and your teams do in Central America and the goals of those missions.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just one of many medical teams that go out from North America and some from Europe. We are professionals generally who are still working. I'm retired now and I can do more, but the majority so we spend 1 week of very intense time, and because our work is so specialized, it's extremely valuable, and we try to do the same quality of work we do in those countries as we do at home. And what has driven me to do it is simply the desire to reach out and touch people that sometimes we can't even get to do here. Just by the nature of the way the welfare system is laid out here, it's much more formalized. But there are people, particularly children, who are needing an opportunity, and they have a deformity or a healthcare condition that just prevents them from even to have any opportunity in the future. One of the large deformities we treat is neglected club feet. You could correct club feet with casting if they're caught early, but these people come from poor communities where they don't have that, and so they have these very badly deformed feet, and what we do is we turn them around so they can walk on them again.
Now, we have an example of that, and I think it's always helpful to put a face on these stories. That's something that's been missing from this overall issue. Right. You shared with me the story of a young girl named Esther, I believe, in Guatemala, and we're going to show some images of that. If you would, walk us through the story of Esther and also the change that brought to not only Esther, but also her family and community.
Esther's a really good story. One of the team members I took kind of fell in love with her, and in a sense of seeing some beautiful young girl with these horrible deformities. The first picture you might see of her is she has a very sad face. And watch the last pictures and see the change in that. Esther came to us in 2016, brought by actually a one-man NGO from the town or near the city of Nibach in central Guatemala. It's 5 hours from where we are. And this gentleman is actually from Seattle, and he's dedicated his life to working there with the people, just simply to help them in every way he can. So Esther comes to us. Both feet are club feet. That means they're turned upside down. She walks on the top. And what Brian did for me is he invited me to come to this visit these people who wanted to say thank you for operating on their kids. We've done over 20 children from his area, and so many years I would go on my mission and go home, go on my mission and go home. And I thought, well, how selfish that is of me when I'm getting an invitation to go to their houses. Of course, they're humble houses. I go there, there's a dirt floor, they have wood stoves, they have kids running around, and they're poor, but they are full of love, and they want to say thank you. So Esther, in 2016 we fixed her, I think it was her left foot, and then 2017 we fixed her right foot. And it transitioned her from somebody who really was going to be excluded from her society. Some of these children are not even allowed to go to school because they're physically disabled. And so you create hope, you create an opportunity, and that's what we're trying to do here in a medical mission is, we can't solve all the problems, and we have to warn our volunteers, you're going to see things you can't fix, but you can fix these things. And Esther's a really good example. She's from a family of 6. Her mother is a bit older, and so we were able to change her life and then go back and see her actually with these repaired feet with the opportunity. She now knows that she has a future. She wouldn't go outside and play with the kids before that at all, and now, as you see in the last picture, she's in the soccer field.
That's a magical
and that
story.
means hope. Hope is everything. In fact, one of the great organizations that takes on medical mission teams out of Phoenix, Arizona is Esperanza. And I'm telling you, they do the same thing we do, but with hope. That really defines what you're giving these people.
You just have to look at that picture of Esther to see that change that it's occurred. And this is multiplied over many, many children, many, many families. Before I ask you the next question, we're actually going to share a video that you made available to us. And this documents St. Benedict Joseph Medical Center in Honduras.
Right.
And so we're going to take a look at just a little bit of that video right now.
The majority of patients that we serve would come from the area of Comayagua, which is a small city in the heart of Honduras. Comayagua is surrounded by mountains. The really poor are the ones who live up in those mountains. Some so far from the city that they don't even have electricity. Some not even running water. St. Benedict Joseph Medical Center serves over 2,000 people a month during the year with an average of 6 medical missions. It serves as many as 500 patients through surgeries.
Yo nunca había encontrado un lugar que me trataran de bien como me han tratado aquí. Aquí sí encontré todo lo que yo necesitaba. Paciencia, amor, cariño, servicio, todo.
Looked at what this one clinic is doing, what this one hospital is doing. Give us a better sense of the perspective you've gained from the overall situation that children, their parents, their families are meeting in places like Honduras, like Guatemala, and faced with that decision to maybe leave their country and come seeking refuge, asylum in other countries.
Well, just sort of a little bit of background. I've been going to this hospital in Guatemala we just talked about for 8 years, and we find going to the same facility over and over again is much more effective because you build relationships, you build networks, you leave equipment, so you have a lot to build on. I took an anesthesiologist as a volunteer 1 year and about 3 years ago, and he is on the board of this hospital in Comayagua, Honduras, which is run by the friars, the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. I think their headquarters are in New Jersey, but these friars run this hospital. It was built in 2005 specifically to host surgical mission teams because there was such a paucity of surgery available to the poor people in Comayagua and from the villages around it in particular, where the poorest of the poor are, and they're reaching out there right now. So that's how I got invited. I got invited because of my skill in pediatric orthopedics, in children's deformities, and particularly the club feet that nobody seemed to know what to do with. They didn't have the facility. So I went on my first trip in September. Second trip's coming up in this coming January. They actually had no x-ray machine to start with, so we raised enough money privately and with the help of my Rotary Club, to put an x-ray machine in the operating room. That's there now, waiting for me in January when I go back. Those are the little things that you try, medical missions are about meeting the needs of what will make things better so that it can be much more self-sustaining. I mean, I want an orthopedic surgeon from there to come over and say, hey, you guys have a nice x-ray machine. I want to do work on these people, right? So making them self-sustaining is a big part of it.
I might turn to Ross Egge, who serves as the Northwest Director of a group called NPH USA. Ross, add your perspective, because you've traveled widely down there, and also tell us a little bit about the work that your group does.
Yeah, absolutely. So NPH, Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, started about 6 years ago in Mexico, and it started as an orphanage and a home for orphaned and abandoned children. Since then, we've expanded our services to support families and children in a variety of different ways based on their particular circumstances. We're in 9 different countries throughout Latin America and the Caribbean now. I've had the opportunity to work on the ground in very many of the different countries for almost 15 years now. Just recently moved home from Honduras, where I was for the past 6, about 2 years ago. And one of the things that makes NPH specifically unique is that we do follow the trajectory of each child, each family, up through to their highest level of independence. So you don't age out, our kids don't age out at 18 or 21 or when they finish high school. We put them all the way through university if they're able, any higher education, any additional certifications in trades or anything. We really are working to try and provide these children who, as you mentioned earlier, would likely be lost to the world if it weren't for these opportunities. We give them the opportunity to become productive members of their own societies, and yet even with our greatest success stories, the doctors, an orthopedic surgeon, lawyers, educators of all stripes, they're still facing the same systemic circumstances in their country that the cards are really stacked against them. Even when they do have incredible capacity, incredible initiative and drive to be successful and make good choices and help their communities, they're still up against it. And we have, especially in Honduras, where I was for the past 6 years, it is, as Steve mentioned, a lot of the violence and corruption that sets these communities up for really no exit. They don't know how to get out. He mentioned the extortion operations that the gangs do. That's very, very common. To kind of set the scene a bit, you have communities that cannot trust the local police. They do not trust the local police because of the corruption that's there. So they trust these gangs that have taken over their community, their neighborhood, and they come around each month and ask for, sometimes each week, and ask for money. The amount can change, could stay the same, and you have to pay. And if you pay, you're fine. These are some of the safest neighborhoods in the city if you abide by their rules, if you do what they say, if you pay them what they ask. Shortly before I left Honduras, there was a young boy and his sister who came to us, who were brought to us through the government, who come from a circumstance that I think highlights the level of violence and danger that many of the families that we serve are up against. It's a family of 3 siblings. The oldest daughter was 17 or 18. Their father had been out of the picture. And then a young boy and about 13 and his sister who was 15. So 18, 15, and 13. And for whatever reason, the older daughter the father was out of the picture. The older daughter somehow caught the eye of one of the gang members in the community, and he decided that he wanted to spend time with her. And she refused. She rejected him, and that's not allowed. That's not okay. I don't need to go into the details of all of what happened next, but the younger boy and younger girl were tied up in the back room, while the mother and the older daughter, were executed for not complying. The younger siblings were brought to us, to NPH, and we had to find a way to protect them, to make sure that they knew that they were safe, that they were home, that we would be with them to support them on their journey, and also mitigate the risk of that same gang or the extensions of it finding out where they are. So for about the first year that they were with us, we actually had them separated in 2 of our separate programs in different areas in order to help make sure that they weren't found. Who of any of us, anyone, in face of these type of circumstances, wouldn't desperately look for any other option? And many do, and many find those opportunities in organizations like NPH, like those who have medical ailments through medical missions and otherwise. There are incredible organizations doing amazing things in these countries. And we need that. There needs to be that counterbalance. We need to be working at that root problem and investing in the long term to give these countries, these communities, a chance to not be in the circumstance where they feel the need to flee from violence, corruption, and for better opportunity.
I think that gives us a better perspective in terms of why these people are seeking to come to the United States. Jorge and Beth, as you've listened to these stories, what's your reaction? What comes to mind for you?
Well, I think just following up on what we heard just now, I think, we see sort of the other end of the pipeline, if you will. Our organization provides legal assistance, and it's sad because our organization has been around for 34 years, and we started because of another sort of exodus of people fleeing violence from Central America, specifically during the 1980s, during the civil wars there. And so that's how we, as an organization, got started, and we've since evolved to help people from 130 different countries. But certainly over the last 6-7 years, we've seen this dramatic increase in the number of people fleeing Central America, and specifically the 3 Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And it's because the levels of violence and the levels of impunity that we've heard have gotten to the point where people don't see other options. So it's really, I think that one of the things to understand here is that we're not talking, particularly with this group, of voluntary migration. It's what I would refer to as forced migration. Right. And people don't see any other option. And so when we're seeing those situations, I think we desperately need to work on making the situation better. So many of the clients that we work with didn't want to leave, that they had their own communities, making the journey they knew was dangerous. But really, when you're facing the choice of danger to yourself, to your children, I think it's what anybody would do, any reasonable person would do. And so I think we need to understand those dynamics and really work on working for the long-term strategy that is really going to solve this issue, which is to promote programs that are working on the ground to make the situation better, but at the same time, in the short term, provide protection for the people who are fleeing these situations instead of sort of walling them off, literally, from being able to access protection here in the United States.
Beth?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the stories don't surprise me. It's what we hear all the time in our asylum work from all different countries, including those in Central America. The situation that people have come from is horrific. The stories we hear of execution, decapitation, torture. Jorge and I work on a survivor of torture program together. I think they're so horrific. Sometimes it's even hard to believe, and yet they're absolutely true. And one of the things that we work on is volunteer doctors who actually document the evidence on the body of torture so that it can be submitted in asylum cases. And I think that that's one of the things that is really lacking in this conversation is a nuanced understanding of all of the different factors and different types of migration. Economic migration is one type of thing. Humanitarian or forced migration is another type of thing. Our international policy and the factors on the ground is a whole nother type of thing. And I think that we keep thinking that there's one problem and one solution, and it keeps us stuck in really not solving things. I would also say that one of the great things of working with refugees and asylum seekers in that field of forced migration that really makes me proud to live in the United States, and that also gives me great sorrow to think that we're abandoning, is that we have historically been a country that provides sanctuary for people who have been forced to flee. And I do think that as a country, as we turn on our back on that history and on that legacy, we really lose something of who we are as Americans. And it really diminishes, our standing in the world, and it diminishes the goodwill that many people have as they look to the United States as that beacon of hope. And I think those things aren't really quantifiable, and it's a huge loss in who we are as Americans, as well as a loss to individuals who desperately need that sanctuary and have no place else to go.
This has been a very powerful discussion, and I think it's raised, as we'd expect, many more questions than we've had time to cover. And we're going to do that. This is part one, and we hope you'll join us for Challenge Part 2, which will be airing next week. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you each of us for joining us as well.